Fate is exactly why some people say The Lord of the Rings is just too tidy and neat. We all know nothing in the books is that simple. The great part is when you start looking deeper, it gets even more complex rather than less. Hello everybody, welcome to Aude and Tulivo, where we're walking our way through Tolkien's Legendarium. Today we're beginning chapter 2 of book 2, the Council of Elrond. This is a massive chapter, both in pages comparatively and in scope. So we'll spend a couple weeks in this chapter, though we won't go quite as long as Exploring Lord of the Rings did, 60 some odd episodes. Let's dive in. After the party the night before, Frodo awakes feeling refreshed. Gandalf comes to get him for the council and asks him if he's ready for the council. "I feel ready for anything," answered Frodo, "but most of all, I should like to go walking today and explore the valley. I should like to get into those pine woods up there." He pointed away far up the side of Rivendell to the north. And these lines generally don't stick out to me, but as I was going through this time, it struck me that after he takes care of the, necessary things, talking with Bilbo, he just wants to walk in the woods. And I started kind of wondering why. Why is that such an important thing? We could just say it's because he's always like walks, maybe. The thing is, he's only been awake from his ordeal since the day before. Now, I've never been out for that long, like 4 days like he was, but I have had a pretty serious surgery. I was not up for going on a walk in the woods. I was barely up for going on a walk to the bathroom. I think the idea of the walk is really a healing thing for Frodo, not physically, but spiritually. First, we're in Rivendell. I can't imagine a place like this where the elves have lived for a few thousand years and it doesn't have some sort of healing properties in and of itself. It would probably be something similar to Legolas doing his waking dream thing to rest. But it's also a resting place for his mind, just kind of a reset. I think he also realizes deep in his subconscious that this time in Rivendell, luckily, quite a while, will be his last long rest in Middle-earth. We see in the last few chapters of Return of the King that he is no longer whole. Middle-earth can't give him the healing he needs. He has 2 months in Rivendell to rest before he is changed forever. And we see the healing already beginning in just a day. To Frodo, his dangerous flight and the rumors of the darkness growing in the world outside already seemed only the memories of a troubled dream. But the faces that were turned to meet them as they entered were grave. And though the healing was beginning, he's quickly reminded there are dark things to deal with. Many of these faces that turn to look at him will never meet again outside of this chapter in the book. Aside from those we would assume to be at, such an important meeting, Aragorn, Glorfindel, Gandalf, and Elrond, we've met Glóin, of course, and we'll get to know his son Gimli quite well. There's a bunch of elves, including Elrond's chief counselor, Erestor, Galdor from the Grey Havens representing Círdan, and strange elf Legolas. The introduction of everyone seems pretty normal until you really get to Legolas. It's almost kind of a throwaway line. There was also a strange elf clad in green and brown, Legolas, a messenger from his father Thranduil, the king of the elves of northern Mirkwood. But doing some extra research, because if you're like me, you have a hard time remembering the difference between all of these 72 different types of elves, it makes sense. Legolas is a Sindarin elf. The Sindarin elves are essentially defined by this. They crossed the mountains into Beleriand and resided in Doriath. In Doriath, they were under the rule of Thingol and Melian. Melian was a Maia, and Thingol was one of the 3 elves taken to Valinor and brought back to tell the other elves it was really cool over there. He was the only elf to see the light of the trees and not actually dwell in Valinor or on its shores like the Teleri. Legolas's grandfather lived in Doriath, as well as his son Thranduil, Legolas's father. The Sylvan elves, which I always confuse with Sindarin elves, never crossed the Misty Mountains and stayed in the Vale of the River Anduin. These became the main population of the elves in Mirkwood and Lothlorien. So my new headcanon is that Legolas is strange because his grandfather and father both saw the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, even if only reflected from Thingol's eyes and in his wife Melian. We know through the Silmarillion that, generally speaking, those who saw the light of the trees had more power. And Frodo hasn't seen an elf who's had that particular experience with the light of the 2 trees before. Glorfindel lived in Valinor. Elrond also never saw the light with his own eyes, but it was reflected to him, but he also has Maiar blood in him. But Frodo has also met them before. We can see in the histories that how an elf interacted with the light defines basically what type of elf they are, so it's not crazy to think that that is maybe why Legolas is strange. Frodo, and maybe Sam writing this, not sure, has never met an elf like that before. And after Legolas, we come across a tall man with a fair and noble face, dark-haired and gray-eyed, proud and stern of glance. And then an entire paragraph dedicated to what he looked like. He was cloaked and booted as if for a journey on horseback, and indeed, though his garments were rich and his cloak was lined with fur, They were stained with long travel. He had a collar of silver in which a single white stone was set. His locks were shorn about his shoulders. On a baldric he wore a great horn tipped with silver that now laid upon his knees. He gazed at Frodo and Bilbo with sudden wonder. I tend to think Sam wrote this part. I doubt Frodo would say anyone looked at himself in sudden wonder. He would probably say curiosity or something. But Sam, being Sam, remembered his initial thought upon seeing this man, regal, rich, and clearly looked with wonder at Frodo because Frodo deserves it, he does. Of course, this is Boromir we're introduced to. But it is interesting to think about. Did Sam really write it? Wouldn't he be just a little protective of his master to talk about Boromir in such a gushing fashion? But would Frodo write it that way after what, happens later in the book? Or would Frodo be the bigger man of the two and, hearing Aragorn's account of Boromir's last moments, forgive him and wish to paint him in the best light? I don't really have an answer. I could lean either way, really depending on my mood. It's just kind of an interesting thought. And with Boromir's introduction, we can say that not only is every peoples that is an enemy of Sauron present, but every stronghold as well, except for Lorien and Rohan. They're represented. Present are the Grey Havens, the Shire, not exactly a stronghold, but still, the Dunedain, Rivendell, Erebor, and Gondor. While it's not exactly last alliance of elves and men, all are represented. I see Tolkien using this as a quick way to let the readers know this is not a localized conflict. We'll have to read the appendices later to really find out more about the other battles fought around Middle-earth, but these 2 paragraphs tell us it really is the whole world's problem. As the council finally gets down to it, we learn of the dwarves and the reason Glóin came to Rivendell in the first place. Glóin says, "A shadow of disquiet fell upon our people. Whence it came we did not at first perceive. Words began to be whispered in secret. It was said that we were hemmed in a narrow place, and that greater wealth and splendor would be found in a wider world. Some spoke of Moria, the mighty works of our fathers that are called in our own tongue Khazad-dûm, and they declared that now at last we have the power and numbers to return." But where did that shadow of disquiet come from? Who floated the idea that they were hemmed in? I have 2 theories. First, they're the lasting effects of the Dwarven Rings. The Dwarven Rings made them rich beyond measure, figuratively speaking. And while the Lonely Mountain Kingdom was pretty sweet, what's one mountain when you could have 3 mountains? And Mithril. Mithril was to be found in Moria, and we'll find out later they were hoping to find Thor's ring. Was it just simple greed? Well, my second opinion is, I think, way cooler. It was all Sauron. It's a shadow of disquiet. Sauron was playing 4D chess. This is after he leaves Dol Guldur, so he's comfortable in Barad-dûr, and now he has time to really start planning. He comes up with a genius plan. He'll sow discord among the dwarves and convince a group of them they need to seek one of the Dwarven rings in Moria, one he has already in his possession, most likely. He's had years to build up his orc army there after the wars with the dwarves, and he knows that the hidden fear is there as well. At this time, he hasn't captured Gollum, so he thinks if they happen to have the One Ring and have kept it secret, they might show their hand if they try to retake Moria. So get the dwarves to go to Moria, kill whichever ones go. They'll probably be good warriors, so he'll get rid of some of the dwarves he'll have to fight in the battles up north later. It's like a bait and switch. Espionage. I never thought of it like this before, but it kind of came to me and I absolutely love the idea. It wasn't just a random event that happened. Sauron worked it. And now Sauron sends a messenger to Erebor asking about the ring. And this is so telling. The Lord Sauron the Great, so he said, wished for our friendship. Rings he would give for it, such as he gave of old. And he asked urgently concerning hobbits, of what kind they were and where they dwelt. For Sauron knows, said he, that one of these was known to you on a time. He has now captured and tortured Gollum and knows Bilbo had the One Ring, but he tempts them with rings like they had before. This solidifies the theory to me that Sauron was behind the Whispers in the first place. Get them to waste themselves fighting in Moria and then offer them the exact rings they went to look for. He even says so in the next paragraph. As a small token only of your friendship, Sauron asked this, he said, that you should find this thief, such was his word, and get from him, willing or no, a little ring, the least of rings, that once he stole. It is but a trifle that Sauron fancies, and an earnest of your goodwill. Find it, and 3 rings that the dwarf sires possessed of old shall be returned to you, and the realm of Moria shall be yours forever. So Sauron didn't know he would figure out who had the ring, but he played the long game with the dwarves by tempting them to try and find their old ring, getting destroyed, and then thrown a lifeline. I'm telling you, it's 4D chess, like all over. There's a reason the council decides what it does later on. With this threat to the dwarves, it's becoming pretty clear Sauron is a whole world problem. That's why everyone was called here, but by whom? We'll get to that in a minute. So we know Glowin is there partly to tell everyone that Sauron is threatening them, but also to let Bilbo know he's being hunted by the enemy. And here, Elrond lays out the purpose of the council. You will hear today all that you need in order to understand the purposes of the enemy. There is naught that you can do other than to resist, with hope or without it, but you do not stand alone. You will learn that your trouble is a big part of the trouble of all the Western world. The ring. What shall we do with the ring? The least of rings, the trifle that Sauron fancies. This is the doom that we must deem. While the council will do a lot of listening to people telling their story, they have a purpose. It's time to figure out what to do with this trifle Sauron is looking for. And this is something we'll be going over in the next few videos. Like I mentioned, this is a massive chapter. But before we go, we have to figure out what Elrond means when he says the word doom. And I'm sure there are some out there who will understand the word doom used in this context is not a negative thing. We are all familiar with the current usages of the word, either as a noun, death, destruction, or some other terrible fate, or as a verb, condemned to certain destruction or death. But looking at how Tolkien uses the word, we realize it's completely different. Though condemning the ring to destruction isn't the worst idea. It's fitting that the word doom stems from Old English domen, to judge, to pass judgment on. There's more to it, but this fits what we need to know, and I'm not a linguist. That's what they're gonna do here. They need to figure out what to do. What judgment will they lay down? What do they deem is the best way to move forward? Well, it's a good thing they were all called here. Again, by whom? And I'll let Elrond explain. That is the purpose for which you are all called hither. Called, I say, though I have not called you to me, strangers from distant lands. You have come and are here met in this very nick of time, by chance as it may seem. Yet it is not so. Believe rather that it is so ordered that we who sit here and none others must now find counsel for the peril of the world. This is one of my favorite things in the entire book. This was the first time I really realized there was a greater power trying to tip things in favor of the good guys. This is something we'll be seeing over and over again, and was even mentioned by Gandalf back in chapter 2 in book 1. He said Bilbo was meant to find the ring and Frodo was meant to have it. That means there's a power working. I have the habit of always thinking Eru is the one who is intervening. I'm not 100% sure why, but we'll see higher power involvement later that very clearly points to some of the other, like Valar, rather than Eru the one. Everyone here at the council came under different circumstances and for different reasons, but they were all called. They're there to form the last alliance of the Third Age, and possibly the last alliance ever. But not just of elves and men, this is the alliance of all races, all enemies of Sauron, fighting for his downfall. And that wraps up part 1 of the Council of Elrond. Next week, we'll be going over the foundations we need in order to deem our doom. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out the links in the description for some of my favorite book versions. And until next time, out into the day shall come again.